What are you doing in here? Yeah, you should just go outside. It's my semantic theory of the universe. It begins with particles of semiotics, which are this, what's it called? Anonymous code. It's virtual. It's just kind of like hanging out in everybody's brains. But it's not really real until it's employed through semantics, through the act of two people speaking. And they use all those words, and they pack those words with this thing called meaning that shuffles between one person and another. Now, built out of semantics, which is built out of semiotics, is this thing called fiction. And in my conception, we're just going to basically break fiction into two parts. One is a poem, and one is a parable. So basically, a poem is a internal experience or a voice or some sort of reaction, very discrete, very intimate. And then a parable is something that is a string of action, which is, it could be intimate, but it could also be action-oriented or about a dream or about an adventure or about, somebody going on a quest, etc. So you take all those statements and you can form them in these two basic units of fiction. Now, what a character is you're starting to build in this virtual world of meaning, this replication of a human being or a projection of a human being called a character. And how you do that, the best way to do that through fiction, is you take a parable, an arc of happening, and then you append the parable internal experience or some sort of reaction to all of the experiences. And, basically you string a bunch of poems, as I've defined poems as discrete units of internal experience, into a parable. And that gives this character that you tie together with a name, a voice, and kind of this characteristic. Now, the character is the fundamental unit of the next step, which is drama. What you do is, we're all using units. So we start with the semiotic units that are built into these sentences. Then sentences are formed into these units of fiction, and then the units of fiction are built into characters. And then what we have here is the drama, where you have a bunch of characters interacting with one another. And they express relationality. And they express community, and they express, war, and all these other more and more complex units of this virtual discourse. We're no longer building meaning, we're building a world here, right? And what comes to be actually in the parable is this, I didn't get into this here, but basically there's this world and then there's this character within the world, or this agent world kind of situation. That's expanded on and built upon, and then you have this whole dramatic field. All right. And then what you do is you start to take all these discrete units of drama, all these different scenes you could call them, and characters within scenes, and you start to build a lore base. And you have all these basic units of lore. And you can think about it in Greek mythology. You had a bunch of people talking about Mars and Venus and Zeus and Aphrodite, etc. Sorry, I'm kind of using their Roman names. But all that lore base is eventually taken as units to make a bigger project, okay? And what you need there is this epic poet, which takes all that lore, which is all this drama, and he constructs it out of a very particular form of basically what they're called epithets, or an epic voice, right? Which is he becomes a character himself that organizes all this lore. He also uses the very roots of language, which would be meter and rhyme, which are kind of pre-semiotic, just the basic units. And he forms every level of this virtual kind of thing called language into the epic. And that creates a unit, if it's done correctly, and becomes internalized by society as a cultural identity. Now, this is where things get kind of iffy here and very, very speculative. What I propose is that if the epic is of certain qualities, inspiring enough and forceful enough and broad enough for people to live within, that's what you have. You have a bunch of poets or people that live inside of that epic. You have a bunch of people living inside of that culture, and then they through their interaction with that epic, which could be like, you could see the Bible or, any sort of holy text, they begin to replicate that, and they interiorize, interpret, and then perpetuate that cultural code. Those are the minor poets. They become units of the epic in the world. That's the weird thing. So now this whole virtual edifice is something that human beings live within and project onto the world. They are the units of this epic. And that's where you get these cultural identities and religious identities. Now, this is totally speculative, and I need to work on it because I didn't really take into account the postmodern situation. What I proposed here, and this is a few years ago, is that the modern novel, or modernity, is the human being kind of exists between these different epics, these different cultural codes, and through different tools of individualism or conceptions of individualism, they begin to arrange these different cultural edifices to kind of discover their own self, and the self becomes the most important thing within the modern era. The individual is the interpreter of everything. The individual is called upon to be the epic poet of their own life. Now, not everybody can do that, but that's kind of the situation. And insofar as people can't do that, they trick themselves into thinking that they're the epic poet, but really they're minor poets, just kind of interiorizing and interpreting and then perpetuating somebody else's epic. Then you have the postmodern novel, which is, this is the structure for my own work, which I'll just briefly say that if we can use all of the different genres of fiction as units, we can create a super story. We can create a super epic if we treat genres and everything from poetry to philosophy to science fiction to horror to the modern novel to all these different forms. Fairy tale, myth, romance, etc. You could organize them if you could find the correct organizing principle, the correct kind of epic DNA. You could organize all those things into a novel that is completely a circular, perpetual meaning machine that's aware of its own virtuality, and then is able to kind of waken up the reader into this whole dramatic field of fiction and kind of perpetuate itself very interactively with a multitude of forms of meaning, where you have this kind of epic of epics going on. So that's kind of my theory. And I bored Bodhi enough that he stopped fooling around in my room. I need to hop on an interview. Talk to you later.